I anticipate people to be coming in all while we're talking, but we need to get going if we want to get out of here by 8, and we'll keep a tight ship here. I'm so happy and very grateful for all of you to be here. I think this is a true case of David and Goliath, and we need, little people need to have a very big megaphone. So this is really truly trying times for us. We have a lot at stake. My name is Kathy Biala, and I am a citizen for Just Water, as all of you are. If you believe, as we do, that we share a common interest in preserving and protecting a long-term sustainable water supply with equity among competing interests, that if that's important to you, and if you want to promote the fair and equitable use and development of sustainable water resources without adverse consequences to the needs and the rights of any other. If you agree with these concepts, then we all are citizens for Just Water. And the key words here are preserving and protecting, long-term and sustainable water supply, equity and fairness, and my personal favorite, without adverse consequences to the needs and rights of any other. Inherent in this is our need to work together to develop regional projects that share costs and benefit all, not only for the one, while the rest shoulder the consequences. And adverse consequences could mean many different things to people in this room. It might mean not stealing water from another jurisdiction without their explicit invitation and approval. It might mean not pushing for an agenda that further adds more costs to the highest rates of water in the country when there are other affordable and available options today. Water at all costs is not a regional solution. So CalAm has illegally overpumped the Carmel River and overdrafted the Seaside groundwater basin, its own 2 water sources. And in that process, they have charged its customers exorbitant rates, even while the average customer does a sterling job in conservation. Can you trust CalAm to save you from the fire when they created the fire?
No.
Without water, CalAm looks outside of its own water jurisdiction to the neighboring region, that is Marina and Ord communities and the Salinas River groundwater basin, to illegally pump our water when they were never involved in our regional water agreements or decisions. And we have our own public water management district. Thank you very much, MCWD. CalAm has managed to get approvals all along from the California Public Utilities Commission and the California Coastal Commission, and has already spent tons of money on the test slant well without first determining its legal rights in our basin, and before the public in the peninsula weighs in on whether you can afford a huge price tag that will benefit CalAm's shareholders, will once again penalize the ratepayers. So there are a lot of things fundamentally wrong with this CalAm project, and we hope to shed some light tonight for you on this and give you opportunities for you to send your comments to the entities that are approving this final environmental impact report. We call it the FEIR. So, moving along, and we are going to be going quickly, and forgive me because we're on a tight schedule. I will be keeping a tight ship, and I will be warning our speakers when they have 1 minute. So I always feel kind of rude in doing that. But first up, we have Julie Hoffman, and she is going to give us an overview of the project. And she is a citizen for Just Water. Just
go around with the technology here so you can see what I'm talking about here. Okay. So I'm going to give a little background about what the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project is. And it came about because, well, as Kathy mentioned, that they need water out on the peninsula. CalAm was hit with a cease and desist order in 2009. And they had until 2016 to come up with a plan. Of course, that got changed to come to 2021. But what they need to do is they need to get approvals for this this project, and they need to be building before 2021 to meet the CDO order. And so this project is actually made of several components. It has an aquifer storage and recovery. It's called ASR. That's already in progress. There's also a recycled water project, groundwater replenishment component. These are all things that are regional water solutions and everyone agrees on. And so the last part of the MPWSP is the Slant Well project, the desalination plant that a lot of you are here to hear about tonight. There are two sizes of the plant that are proposed in the EIR. One is for a 9.6 million gallons a day of source water pulling up out of the aquifers and the salt water. There's also a 6.4 million gallon a day. That one is actually going to have a component of the recycled water attached to it, so it'll allow it to actually meet the CDO with smaller size of recycled plant and then water. But I'll let other people tell you about that. So this project actually covers 18 miles of pipe. So it goes all the way from, it starts in Marina, but they'll be piping all the way to Castroville and all the way to Carmel to serve the water. The water will be shipped north and south from our aquifer. And let's see. The project is, this is an overview of Marina, and you can see up here, this is where the actual desal plant will be built. It's out there on Jim Benson Road, and of course there's the sewage treatment plant, so that's very convenient. And then this is actually where the slant wells are proposed, and that is the CEMEX property that a lot of people worked very hard to see it get closed and be saved for conservation and outdoor recreation, but yet this is where 10 slant wells are proposed to be built. It'll take up groundwater along with seawater. This is the slide that was used in 2014 to gain support for the project, and as you see, it was told, everyone was told that it was subsurface ocean intake water. And look, it's way under the ocean. This is actually the reality of what we are dealing with. The slant wells are not a giant straw. The water doesn't get pulled in here. It comes, all this whole red area with the blue lines is actually how it takes up groundwater, along with brackish water and a mixing of ocean water. So also the 10 slant wells that are planned up there will take up a 6-acre area of snowy plover habitat. So there's a lot of things that aren't adequately addressed in the FEIR. Water rights, some other people will be telling you about some of these subjects, but I'll just briefly go through them. The impacts to groundwater, we're in a critically overdrafted basin. There's a claim made that slant wells will reverse seawater intrusion, but I don't really believe the facts that I read out of that EIR. It's a very narrow science, and the no harm has really not been proven. There's a social injustice factor coming into a community and not even adding any of the future water needs for our community, but all the risks will be in our environment. And I did mention, of course, that the water that is shipped out of Marina, none of it goes back to Marina. It's all shipped to Peninsula customers and to Castroville. Community values are open space and conservation, as I mentioned, on the CEMEX site. And there's no responsibility written up for harm after the fact. There's no reparation really spelled out if things are not correct. The experimental slant well design, it has no history of reliability and maintenance in providing water for paying customers. The peninsula will have very expensive water with so many unaccounted costs. And there are, as mentioned before, less expensive, reliable sources that have been given less consideration and will provide water sooner, yet are dismissed as being alternate. And so I'll let you talk to the next person.
Thank you, Julie. And now George Riley, our fearless leader of Public Water Now, whose volunteers just collected 11,405 signatures. only needed 6,100 to get this measure on the ballot in November to consider a feasibility study that will buy out Cal-Am in the future. So, with that, George?
Thank you. Well, it takes a village, we all know that.
Yep.
But it pays to be reminded because everybody has a role to play, and everybody should be reminded that they can play a role, and they do play a valuable role. So keep it up, guys. We're still part of a team. What might happen and what might your experiences be if Cal-Am succeeds in this project? Well, these are the things you can look forward to. First of all, Cal-Am is the largest water corporation in the country. So you will be seeing a boatload of monopoly bullying. It's their pattern, it's their standard. There's a lack of transparency in what they do. Most of what they do is considered proprietary. So they don't have to share the science they learn or the experiences that they get from anything they do. They don't have to share that with anyone. And they're pretty closed-mouthed about those kind of things anyway. So what happens as a comparison to a public agency, most of their material is public, transparent, public meetings, public hearings. You can go to those great people and ask them questions. You can get documents from them. You can't do any of that with Cal-Am. There are battles. If you have battles with Cal-Am in any way, you will be doing battle in San Francisco, not in your backyard, not locally. They usually have one hearing on a subject locally, whatever the subject is, but they'll only have one locally. It'll be expensive, and don't think for a minute that tuck-ins is not a serious issue with this community and with four-door development. The only development in the community on the peninsula in the future is in the Ord community. And don't think for a minute that Cal-Am, even though they deny it over and over and over and over again, that it has nothing to do with what their plans are. Their footprint in Marina puts them exactly where they want to be in relation to future development. They will deny this, and deny this, and deny this. But if you go to their American Water Works annual reports, you will find a description of their growth policies. And their growth policies uses the phrase tuck in, they use the description of small districts, small service areas, and they use the language of acquiring them. So whether they acquire it or not is not the issue. If they're here, they have a footprint, they're a monopoly, you will forever be dealing with that kind of power dynamics in your own community. They have an inside politics of the PUC. The main decision makers for Cal-Am are with the PUC, again in San Francisco. That'll be your experience. You'll have to go to San Francisco. You'll probably have to hire an attorney or a nutcase like me who does it for nothing. But I'm a peanut in that environment. The real politics are at a much higher level at the PUC. Cal-Am's good at it. They've got a lot of money. They spend a lot of money on attorneys. They're up there all the time. Their offices are right across the street from PUC. There'll be a PR barrage. You'll get that over and over and over again. PR, PR, PR. Not necessarily facts, not necessarily an open discussion, not necessarily access to their data, but you will get a barrage of PR. And the regulatory bedfellows, PUC and Cal-Am, they're together. It's a stacked deck against the locals. Stay together, stick together, and act. And then we can make things better in the future.
Thank you very much. And I just want to say that there are two representatives of Cal-Am here. I don't know the gentleman, but I think that's Kevin Stedman. So welcome. And you know, as George is saying about transparency, we have not seen any Cal-Am representatives come to Marina. And so, you know, to hear the concerns of the residents. So just for you to understand where our situation lies. Let's see, now, next is Gail Morton, and she has been our city council member in Marina for 6 years now, and she's going to talk about some highlights of the FEIR, the Final Environmental Impact Report, and some important things that have not been adequately addressed or minimized or even omitted. Thank you.
Oh, so Keith is going to open this presentation. So actually my presentation is just going to hit on some real important things. The California Public Utilities Commission that is what George just led us up to. He's calling it CPUC. So let's look at that. That's a California agency that's going to be deciding whether this project should be approved. He's already told you Cal-Am has spent $1 bazillion not only trying to influence all of our opinions, but spent $1 bazillion on drafting documents, hiring experts to persuade the CPUC that this project is good, it's good for the peninsula, and it's good for Marina. It's not going to hurt Marina. So we, the locals, are the only public relations PR people that we have to counterbalance that at the CPUC. And so that is what we have you here today, is because unless you have your voice heard, this state agency that's to protect us, protect every jurisdiction in the state of California, is not there to protect Cal-Am. It's not there to protect any one corporation. It's there to protect you and me, our water, our resources going forward. But if it doesn't hear from us, it will rule, because the only thing it has in front of it is what Cal-Am has spoon-fed for it to hear and evaluate. So what I'm here to say is right now is the open time to have comments to this final draft EIR. And we all commented earlier this year, the city has made significant investment into commenting. But it's now one more time. It's one more time when the window is open for us to be our best PR, for all of us to go there and communicate. You can write to them. You don't have to go to San Francisco. You can call, you can email, and we have all that information. We'll address that in a minute. But what are you going to say? What you're going to say is, CPUC, you represent me. CPUC, you need to protect our water. Cal-Am, very easy message. Cal-Am has no water rights in the Salinas Valley groundwater basin. That is a simple sentence that anybody can sit down and write in an email. Cal-Am has no water rights in the Salinas Valley groundwater basin. MCWD could produce the water and they could sell it. But you know what? California state law says Salinas Valley groundwater basin water needs to stay in the Salinas Valley groundwater basin. So why does Cal-Am get to come in and steal it? Well, I want the CPUC to answer that question. Why would you approve a project when your applicant cannot demonstrate water rights? Very simple principle to put in a communication. That's one of the communications that each and every one of us need to be saying as part of our PR campaign. Approval of the project will inflict unmitigated harm on our city. So here we are. Our water is the Salinas Valley groundwater basin. Everybody has seen these. This is unrefuted, undisputed evidence. Everybody in the county sees these maps of saltwater intrusion. Everybody in the county, every expert, every hydrogeologist, who are the experts that look at water, agree we've got saltwater intrusion. And that this saltwater intrusion has been a problem for 70 years. So those colors moving inward in the 180 aquifer and the 400 aquifer, which is where this project is going to draw its water, those colors doesn't mean the saturation of salt. Those colors mean movement. So starting out, in the early years, it was very close to the coast, and now it's moved inland and inland further and further. What causes that? Overpumping. What causes that is that our demands, City of Marina, all of the area that Salinas, farming, everybody, that what we're pumping out of those aquifers, we're pumping more water than those aquifers can supply. So when that happens, you take out the pressure of the fresh water, the seawater rushes in. So now Cal-Am is asking the CPUC, based on their hydrogeologist experts, to say, well, if we put our straws strategically in these locations, it's going to have a different impact. I beg you to use your common sense. If this has been happening for 70 years, and every hydrogeologist that has the legal right to pump, thought that we could put our straws in strategic locations and have a different outcome. Why haven't we done that? That's the point, is there are conflicting hydrogeologists. I'm an attorney, I practice the area of the law that's not in this particular area. I can hire an expert to say A. I hire an expert saying, I really want you to come out that this is the outcome, this is the value of a business, for example. I might hire expert B that I know is going to use a little different strategy and come in at a different outcome. CalAm has paid very well for experts. Marina Coast Water District came in and said, we're going to hire Rosemary Knight, her bevy of scientists, to come up with a different study. The key point that I want all of you to write in your letter to the CPUC is Rosemary Knight's study may be not the silver bullet to stop this, but I want you to let them know that the hydrogeology studies that were done by CalAm and the proponents is not conclusive. It is controversial as well. There's conflicting evidence, conflicting interpretations. And that conflict, when you're dealing with water and long-term water supply that you're going to sacrifice, how can you err on the side of, oh well, let me pick one. Okay, I like yours. The standard of review at the CPUC is they just need to have a hydrogeologist, they just need to be able to support a decision. But remember, these people are just like you and I. They're not experts. They're people that are appointed to a commission that might have some interest in the area, some expertise, but they don't have the expertise to really know that the outcome of this decision to accept CalAm's hydrogeology will not harm Marina's water. That's what I need you to tell them. You're not clairvoyant. Wish you were, but you're not. And the problem is, because that standard of review is so low, when you're talking about the catastrophic outcomes, that the seawater intrusion is going to be exacerbated, that Marina will not have a long-term sustainable water supply, that there will not be a long-term sustainable water supply to do the development on former Fort Ord. That's catastrophic. It should be catastrophic enough for people to act with caution. So my question to the CPUC in my letter is, where is the science that you can rely on? Nobody's given it to you. If you don't want to believe MCWD's expert, how can you believe CalAm's expert? And controversy is true also. But as citizens, as CPUC, being your representative, shouldn't they be able to answer that with more than just a guess? More than just the persuasion, but to be able to say there's going to be no harm. So let's talk about that harm. CalAm says, oh, our experts say there's going to be no harm. So in your letter, when you're writing to the CPUC, if harm happens, if you're wrong and you let this project go forward, it's irreversible. It's irreversible. See this? We've never moved the needle backwards. The harm, the lack of water is irreversibly harmful to us. And the damages are immeasurable. So if the City of Marina sues because we don't have any water, we sue CalAm, what do we get paid? Do I get paid for everybody's house value deteriorating? Do we get paid for the difference in the cost of our water, that instead of being $100 a month, it's $500 a month? Times all of this? And who pays that? Well, CalAm maybe. But if you live on the peninsula, CalAm, you're a client, you should be part of my PR team, because what you're going to pay for is the cost of the project, the cost of your water, the cost of the water that you have to give back to us to replace fresh water, plus the damages that all of us are incurring because you've harmed our water. Those are risks that if I lived on the peninsula, I would be saying I'm not willing to take. And that's why the peninsula needs to be part of this PR team that I'm asking all of us to be. So I'm going to include there's so many other points, but I think my time is about up. But I'm hoping that you hear this loud and clear, that unless I get every one of you to pick up a pen, sign a letter, send an email, or make a telephone call, there will be no change in the outcome, and the project is just headed down the steamrolling down this path. The CPUC needs to hear from every one of you. They need to hear from your neighbors. They need to hear from your friends. The message doesn't need to be long. It doesn't need to be complicated. It doesn't need to be based in science. It's simply they have no water rights, and they will cause irreparable harm to Marina's water. The scientific evidence does not assure us that this is a safe project to go forward. There's my time.
Next, we're going to have Keith Vandermotten. He is the Managing Director of the Marina Coast Water District, that is both a purveyor and a manager of water, and has an elected board that serves 33,000 people in this region. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for having me tonight. Kathy asked me to talk about a recent AEM study that we had done recently and how that actually ties into what we're responding to with the FEIR. So I'm going to go through a little more technical information than what you've heard thus far. So if you have any questions, please do ask. I try not to get too technical, so hopefully it's something you can grasp as we go through it. But really I'm going to be looking at three things, is really how does the AEM look to the current groundwater conditions, to future impacts, and to water rights and harm versus what is in the FEIR and what CalAM talks about in terms of those different things. And Gail had talked about some of that already, and so let me first of all just preface what is the AEM. Some of you may not know what this is. The AEM is called an Aerial Electromagnetic Survey. And what we did is we hired a company to fly a helicopter 395 miles in the North Salinas Valley, and those red lines that you see there are those flight lines. So these are all the flight lines that they flew back and forth. And what they did was they took a 3D image of the basin. So it's like an MRI of our groundwater resources. And from that, we can get a really good understanding of not only what's called the hydrostratigraphy, which is the soils and everything else that are down there, but we actually get a very good understanding of the distribution of water quality. But the flight isn't of itself complete without actually looking at real-world information. And so we looked at over 300 wells to do what's called ground truthing. And so you look at the lithology in the wells and the water quality in the wells, you match it up with this image, and you come up with a very comprehensive view of what's going on underneath the ground, much more so than you can with just a sporadic field of 8 or 9 monitoring wells. And so it's very, very useful information, and so I'm going to go into how we were able to use that as we're responding to the FEIR, but before I do, I also wanted to at least orient you in the sense that our aquifer is actually kind of a layer of different aquifers in this area. And so I just want to at least kind of explain this so you can understand a little bit more what we're talking about. At the top is this area that we call this dune sand aquifer. It's the most shallow aquifer. Sometimes it's called A aquifer, has different names, but we call it the dune sand aquifer. Below that is the 180-foot aquifer. Below that's the 400, and not shown on this is the deep aquifer. So we have these layers of aquifers in these areas. And all of these aquifers actually are interconnected at different points. They're not completely distinct. They are symbiotic. So Gail talked about what is the current condition that most people talk about as far as our groundwater in the area. And the 180 aquifer is this one on the left, so that's the second deepest aquifer we're talking about. And the story that's being told today is that everything behind this line is completely intruded, has no beneficial use, can't use the water. 400-foot aquifer, this is what they say it looks like. And oh, by the way, there isn't a map that talks about the dune sand aquifer. It's not even mentioned. It's as if it doesn't exist.
Keith, are those maps based on the AEM?
These are not, actually. Thank you for that segue. This is what the AEM data looks like. And so the blue marks are actually sources of groundwater by state and federal standards. And so I listed the CEMEX site here. It says CEMEX and X, I guess somehow a new number. But basically this is where the slant wells are going to be. And then when you look at the blue, it's actually shaded from dark to light blue because this is actually a depth. So the deeper down it goes lighter. So this is almost a 3D image, if you will. But what we see is in the dune sand aquifer, there's these large areas of beneficial groundwater. In the 180, and here's this, that I drew a red line to where what the county map showed was all intruded by salt water. Well, the blue shows that that doesn't really match what the AEM shows in the 180. The county maps had no map to show what's going on here. And in the 400, well, actually, you know, they actually did a pretty good job. What we're seeing is that in the deep aquifer, there are more intruded areas, and perhaps maybe that is true, that the 400 has more of an intrusion area. But certainly the 180, the dune sand, we're seeing a lot more fresh groundwater there that really has beneficial uses. This is the source of our groundwater. It must be protected. And so when you look at, first and foremost, if I were to summarize the current conditions based on what is in the FEIR versus what the AEM shows, is that the CalAm and county maps are really assuming incorrect or missing information with regard to what currently exists with the quality of the groundwater in that area. The second is the AEM confirmed that there's unique groundwater recharge conditions in this area. Now there's several studies that have been done that have discussed that. Going back several years, and up until we did the study, nobody's really looked at it recently. This confirmed that there is something unique going on in this area. There is unique recharge from the dune sand aquifer into the 180 aquifer. And it confirmed significant volumes, and I listed them here, and somehow the resolution on this screen doesn't match mine on my computer, unfortunately, so things are getting cut off. But this is what the AEM study as a volume determined was sources of drinking water that currently exist today in each of these aquifers. Nearly 1 million acre-feet of water in the dune sand, almost 1.7 in the neighborhood in the 180. The 400 was a little bit less. Yes, Mike.
So you're calling beneficial groundwater drinking water? Is that the 500 milligrams of sodium?
I'm actually going to show a slide on that a little bit later.
All right.
What I'm using for sources of drinking water is the state standard for sources of drinking water.
All right.
So that current conditions, that's kind of how those things compared up. But let's look at what happens in the future. What's predicted to happen as part of this project? So if you go into the FEIR, one of the important things to look at is actually water level. So before we're looking at water quality, now if you want to say, okay, what's going to happen when we pump? You got to know how the water levels are. Those play a big role. If you look here, this is the 180 aquifer. These are all contours showing water levels. What's really precarious is here's the Salinas River. None of these lines go down past the Salinas River. There's no data. There's no water level information there. So then you go into the FEIR report and you look at, okay, well, they're going to predict a capture zone from this project. Here's the slant well. Here's the drawdown. All of this water within this area is called captured water. It goes into the well. Anything over here doesn't, because you know why? They say that the groundwater flow goes in this direction. It goes inland. So anything that goes inland, it's not going to get captured in the project. So it's very important to get this right. Which direction is the water flowing in the dune sand aquifer? So they assume it's flowing inland. There's no contours showing anything about that. But what does the AEM show? And what does other well data show? Well, before I get into that, I guess we'll have to wait. As a result, what they're showing in their model, if you look at their model results, is they have this particle tracking saying they're pulling in water all the way from the extents of the intruded zones from those county maps. They also show something that's a little different and a lot more conservative with these zone capture maps, which is different than this, but a lot more conservative, saying they're only going to capture water in this general vicinity, and all this water is almost entirely no good. Now I say entirely no good because we know there's some water they're planning on returning, but for the most part they're saying it's going to get intruded over time, it's all seawater anyways, it's no good, don't worry about it. But if you take those same contours that they said, the conservative contours, and you overlay those on the AEM study, look what that's happening. It's going right over that's the dune sand aquifer. So that's pulling all that water in. The 180 aquifer right there as well. It's not good. And so now when we're looking at the water levels in this area, these are contours actually from the Fort cleanup. There's hundreds of wells in the area that we actually looked at the water level information in addition to what the ADM shows as water levels. And we confirmed that the water levels in the dune sand aquifer were actually flowing towards the ocean. And what's happening is it's mounting at the ocean, creating a local groundwater barrier against seawater intrusion in this area. It's very unique, south of the river. It's not the case north of the river, certainly the case right here locally. We also know that these aquifers are interconnected. Again, there's holes or missing aquitars, so whatever happens in the dune sand aquifer will go down to the 180 aquifer, will go down to the 400 aquifer. You have to look at them as a family of aquifers. You have to keep them all protected. They do have a symbiotic relationship. And so if you were to look at it from a schematic, this is in our recent ADM report, our final report, is you have this flow going towards the coast. You have the seawater barrier here and the flow going back into the 180 aquifer. This is the source of drinking water.
Wow.
As we had mentioned before, we have the 400 aquifer, and yes, there's definitely intrusion going into the 400 aquifer. That's true. And that is limited beneficial use. We want to actually move that back, and as a groundwater sustainability agency, that is going to be one of our tasks in the next 20 years, is to work out moving that back out to the ocean. But certainly, if this goes away, this goes in further. So it's important we keep this barrier. Not only that, but if this barrier goes away, this all is going to be hatched like that. So this whole area becomes intruded. One of the reasons why it's important to get your water levels right, this is the map showing groundwater gradients going inland. This is what happens when your groundwater gradients actually go towards the coast. Your capture zone completely changes. If you were to model it differently, you're seeing your capture zone expands exponentially. It's so important you get those water levels right. It plays a large role in trying to figure out where the water is going to enter into your project. So what can I say about future impacts? There's an incorrect landward flow, and so it underestimates the capture zone, first and foremost. So unless they get the groundwater right on the flow, that's going to be a problem. Even if they got that right and it was the more conservative, it's still capturing good groundwater, and it's still going to eliminate that barrier that exists today. That barrier cannot be eliminated. It plays an important role to make sure seawater doesn't come in this area. And I mentioned we're a groundwater sustainability agency. If this project moves forward, it really works at odds to our efforts to reduce seawater intrusion, to actually change the gradient even more so. So as I mentioned, the gradient right now is towards the ocean, and that increases the capture zone. Just wait until we do really good work and we make that even more of a gradient. That's more water in the capture zone. So they're at odds. There's no way that you could move forward with a sustainable project and at the same time be pumping at the coast and trying to induce seawater intrusion. They're incompatible.
So folks, get a sense of scale, how many acre feet does Marina Coast deliver each year to its customers?
Right now, it's in the neighborhood of around 4,000. It's a little bit less.
And if this large desal plant is built, how much source water is it going to pull up?
I have a slide on that too. So this goes to Michael's question. So there's a couple differences in how we look at good groundwater from what was in the FEIR versus the standards that we use from the state and the Fed. So when you look at the CalAm models, they're saying that anything that's less than 500 is drinking water, and so therefore if they capture any of that, they'll go ahead and return that to Castroville. I just want to make a point that that's not an impacted area here at all, so it's going somewhere else. So it's great they're returning it, but it doesn't really help. If it's greater than 500, what they're saying is there's no beneficial use, whatever we take is ours. That's the bottom line. So if it's greater than 500, has no beneficial use, don't worry about it. But when you look at actually what the AEM shows of the volume of water, and when you're trying to assess the actual volume of good water, you look at the standards that the state and feds have. The drinking water standards is up to 1,000. The state has a policy that says anything below 3,000 TDS is considered a source of drinking water, period. It doesn't say 500. The feds have it up to 10,000. They say anything 10,000 below needs to be protected as a source of potential drinking water. Now, 10,000 and above, yes. Now you're getting into water that has limited beneficial use. This is maybe equivalent to the 500 that CalAM's using. So the difference is 500 on their end, I would say, is 10,000 on our end. It's a fairly significant difference. But when you look at how much water is really going to be pulled into the project, CalAMP shows 7% based on what we've shown with our modeling and the groundwater in the area. It could be up to 22%. The return water obligations using the current formula that they have would say on the low end it's 1,000, but if they're going to be pulling as much water as we believe, it could be upwards of 3,000, which is 3/4 of what the entirety of Marina and Ore produce today. And all of it being pulled right on the coast. So that's a huge impact to the area. And a peninsula user might be interested in this fact too, that that amount of returned water has a role in terms of impacting the feasibility of the project. There's a $39.6 million per year annual cost for this project, to develop this project. Initially, the project, if you look at the demands, isn't going to be needed necessarily, so that has to go on top of what current ratepayers are paying initially until growth can pick that up, because you have to figure out some way to pay for it. On the low end, as a CalAMP user, if I use 10 units a month, that's $177 on my bill today. Maybe some point growth will help to pay for that, but it's not going to be there the day that that project comes on board. Somebody's going to have to pay for it. So I would think from a feasibility standpoint, that's a big problem. If you go up to this point, I mean, it's almost infeasible to say that if I don't use an extra drop of water each month, I'm going to be paying another $200 a month. It's a hard pill to swallow, I have to say. There's other key issues with the modeling, and I bring this up because the model is used as one of the pillars to support so much of the project. First and foremost, and this is really big, Gail had alluded to it, the model does not put any foreseeable uses of the basin in the model. So it does not include all the forward reuse plan. Not one bit. The dune sand aquifer in the model is poorly calibrated, mostly because they imported information from a previous model. They tried to vary different inputs and outputs, but they were never able to calibrate the dune sand. As we showed in the beginning, they didn't even look at the dune sand in a lot of the maps. The model they use is incapable of analyzing water quality impacts, which to me is just inconceivable. That's the one thing that you want to be able to look at. That is the only impact I would think you would want to look at. And because they couldn't calibrate any of this, and it was really hard to understand how to get the model to work, they dropped it and put in a different model called a superposition, where they just tried to look at just the impacts of this project without any of the cumulative impacts of anything else. And what that does is it makes it impossible to verify in the field the results of your model. You can't go out and look at what's happening out in the field because you've eliminated what's happening in the real world for just what's happening with this model. So those are really, really bad issues from a modeling perspective, and these are things you wouldn't want to have in a model that you want to trust. So if I were to look at the water rights harm, first and foremost, because there's good groundwater next to the coast, that CalAMP is basically saying is not good water, and therefore we're able to pump it and make it developed water. Well, no, you can't get a developed water right to good groundwater, and that's the water that would go into this well. Marina Ore are certainly harmed by the loss of good groundwater. And there's no protections at all discussed in any of the FEIR. It doesn't say we're going to put in a barrier project, that we're going to work to do something to prevent or protect from this from happening. There's nothing. And when you look at the AEM data and the state federal water quality standards, I would say that the project appears to even approach an infeasibility level. Now that's not necessarily our issue, but it's a regional issue, and we're trying to find regional solutions. I mean, we should be concerned what our neighbors are paying, because we want a solution that works for everyone. The complexity of the model itself is really used to hide the harm and water rights issues, and this is unfortunate. The model is very hard to understand. I would guess even the CPUC does not understand it. Most people don't understand the flaws in that model. And it's unfortunate because one of the pillars that's used over and over again to point to why there's no problems with this. And so that's a real unfortunate thing. In addition, because the model does not use any of the forward or foreseeable uses, it appears to almost be a backdoor to how to explain how you can get an appropriated water right. Because in the FEIR, Callan discusses that Marina Coast has no rights to the water, there's first right, first in time, first in right. So they're almost saying that, well, we're not going to look at those future uses. If we can get in here, that's really our water anyways, it's an appropriate right, because by California law, we can get in first. But the bottom line is that the CPC approves this, it'll transfer Callan's supply issues onto others. It will, because now Fort Ord no longer has those allocations. The Fort Ord reuse plan cannot move forward as it was envisioned. And all of those costs, all those impacts, and the need to develop additional expensive supply now becomes our problem. Because we will now have to do something other than depend on our groundwater. We may have to at some point anyways, but that would make it a certainty and to a larger degree. So what are we doing as Marina Coast? In the last several months, we've been trying to figure out alternate solutions that actually are regionally beneficial. I think we've looked at expanded pure water Monterey. We've offered ways to help support that. We are also developing a recycled water project and have excess supply for a period of time and offered to help to put that into the mix, because those together could give Callan foreseeable supply for the next 15 years, and in that time perhaps we can look at relocating the wells, doing a different type of well intake, horizontal directional drilling, moving them north of the Salinas River where it is actually intruded. Perhaps that would be a better place, moving the location. These are all regional solutions that I think we would hope we could help the peninsula find a solution, but what is being presented to us today isn't a good regional solution. And so we've been trying to figure out a way that we can work together and find something that works for all of us and buy us some time to fix these problems. And because we weren't able to at least get to that, we asked the CPUC to refer the water rights issue to the State Board. We believe the State Board needs to hear this. At this point, nothing in the CPUC process has spent any time in an evidentiary hearing looking at what we've talked about today. And there's no schedule to do that. None. Nobody's looking at this information. It's just going to go through as an EIR, as just believe us, it's in our report, and approve it so we can move forward. So we've asked the State Board to come in and look at this. The State Board is also the one that issued the cease and desist order. They're the ones that are in charge of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and they have the capability to look at water rights. So it makes all the sense in the world that they would opine on this and say, okay, with your AEM study, with what you're presenting, this is what we would conclude as an issue.
Is that the State Water Resource Board?
State Water Resources Control Board, yes.
Will they override the CPUC if they, no?
Well, the way that the referral would work in our estimate is that it would go through an evidentiary hearing at the State Board so that you can rely on the decision. I would believe that the CPUC would be smart enough to follow that, and then certainly would be informed to be able to say this is the right way forward. That's the hope.
The other thing is the CPUC has no water rights jurisdiction.
Correct.
State Board has it, and the State Board is also a trustee of the waters of California, which are held for the benefit of the public. So there's essentially what is being done is trying to do something through the CPUC process that you couldn't do through the planning process.
And the hope is that through that process we can avoid that last bullet point there, and that's the idea. So that's, I guess I'm out of time here, but
Quick question.
yes.
Is Rosemary Knight's final report final and out and available to the public, or will it be available to the public?
We received it this month, and we're actually going to be presenting it at our board meeting next Monday. But it'll also be submitted as part of our FEIR comments. And so it will be available to the public very shortly.
Through that?
Through that mostly, and it's coming to our board Monday, but the more expanded release is part of our FEIR comments.
Okay.
I was just wondering, sir, when the City of Marina, when the land was transferred to the City of Marina by the federal government, by the, I guess the military, would that not have subsumed, I guess my question is there any federal protection? Because would there not be an assumption that water, the groundwater that was associated with this transfer of land would belong to the city? Would that be an establishment of any water rights by any chance?
It's a complicated question, whether or not there's a federal right that exists with the water that came before us. I believe there is, but that's something that a court would have to decide.
Thank you.
Part of the problem that that you presented is really in the slant well technology, that it's going into current aquifers, etc. Is there any way that Cal-Am could amend it and say, we're going to develop a entirely different kind of desal plant that doesn't use slant well technology, but uses an in and outfall line, and just simply make that kind of decision?
I think
Is
so.
that an option?
I would hope so, and that's, I think, some things that we've also said. Unfortunately, I think the timing was such with Cal-Am getting this through the CPUC that there wasn't really a desire to get off course. But yeah, I absolutely believe that there's a solution that's not too difficult to find by looking at a different site for the wells or even a different type of well. And then the issues are avoided.
Is the Castroville option still an open option? I remember that one time it was discussed that Castroville would be the desal plant site with an in and outfall line using that.
It's not the option. There's only one option today, only one recommendation today, and that's this project. So as far as I know, there aren't any other options currently on the table. That, part of finding those alternate water supply solutions was to alleviate this deadline that's coming up, which is the CDO milestone. And I think that's forcing everybody to say, oh, we got to come up with a decision sooner than we have to, even if it's a bad decision. But I think there's ways to even address that too and fix what you're talking about. But yeah, we just haven't gotten there, and we've tried. So CDO cease and desist order. So this is the state order that Cal-Am has to get off the Carmel River, and there's certain milestones, and each year if they miss a milestone, then they have to reduce their allowable take off the Carmel River.
But Keith, it seems from your presentation, it's really coming down to what they define as useless water.
That's a big part of it, yes.
I mean, there's been a lot of issues that all of you have raised right now, but the useless water issue, the 500 number versus the 10,000 number, really seems to me to be a primary argument that they're making. So what I've heard from you, from Marina Coast Water District, is even if it is legally defined as brackish water, there are uses for brackish water within our water district here in Marina. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I think there's a lot of ways you can classify beneficial water. Any water less than 3,000 can be blended or treated in much cheaper ways than doing an ocean desal project, for one. Number two, that water is creating a barrier. And so even if it was above the 3,000, as long as it's preventing salt water from coming in, it's beneficial. So even beyond the standards of 3,000, it still has a beneficial use. But the 3,000 itself, yes, and the state board has said that water is to be protected. And the basin plan says that. And so as a groundwater sustainability agency, as we move forward, that's the standard we're going to be held to. And that's what we want to keep the water at a maximum at. And if it's below that, we want to keep injecting or finding other ways to even bring that down. And eventually maybe that level is direct potable and you can just pump it right out of any tree.
There is a related inconvenient truth for Cal-Am. About 1,000 or 2,000 feet south on the very coast that CEMEX is on, Marina Coast ran a desalination plant and pulled water from that same location and used it to create desalinated water, which we put in our system. Seems to me that that's a factual example of actual use of that water that they say is not usable. I don't think that fact appears anywhere in the EIR, does it?
You should write a letter.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much. That was wonderful. And next up, we we have the best do-gooder in the region according to Monterey Weekly publication, and that's also known as our mayor of Marina. And he's going to speak about what's important to Marina and how we're going to meet the challenges of this FEIR.
Thank you, Kathy. Thanks for coming, everybody. I know most of you have been involved in this in some way or another, but there are some new faces, and it takes the experienced and the new energy together to be as successful as we can in this process. My charge here is to tell you an update from the city and what the City of Marina is going to do from this point forward. Just like the public, we have a deadline of April 19th to get our comments in regarding the document called the Final Environmental Impact Report. So our city and our paid consultants are working together to prepare those comments. As you know, it's a very large document with very little time to review to be able to provide substantive comments. So we're doing the best we can. Fortunately, there's very little change between the final and the draft that preceded it. So our comments, which we sent in on the draft environmental impact statement report, weren't really very well addressed in the final, and so many of our final comments will resemble our draft comments. But that's step number one. Every step of the way we have to be as engaged as possible, but our overall goal is to protect the sacred water for the City of Marina and those who drink from it on Fort Ord and in the central part of Marina. Every community has to have good water for a good quality of life. So it's our lifeline. There's nothing more sacred as far as a natural resource than the water that we drink and the air that we breathe. So we're going to do everything we can, but it starts with the FEIR comments. Then in approximately June timeframe, there'll be a draft certificate of public convenience and necessity, a CPCN, from the Public Utility Company, the California Public Utilities Commission. So we need to be, as a city, engaged in that process. And then in the September to December 2018 timeframe, there'll be a final certificate of public convenience and necessity, a final CPCN from the California Public Utilities Commission. So we need to be involved in that process. If they issue a CPCN to allow CalAm to do what is proposed, then the city has to look at that permission and see if it is something that we need to challenge in court. If it will threaten our sacred water, then we will challenge it in court. Of course, we will do everything we can to protect our sacred water, as every community would do if they were in our position. In this multi-step process that I just mentioned that's coming up this year at the California Public Utilities realm, we will be fighting for environmental justice. The City of Marina household income is 8% less than the Monterey County household income. We are not the most affluent community in Monterey County, but we are a very special community to be part of. And we do not think that if the roles are reversed and Marina was insisting somewhere in the CalAm service area, Monterey, PG, Seaside area, that we had to put our slant wells on their beaches because we have a water issue, and we were very sorry that they would not get a drop of that water, and we were very sorry that virtually the entire brunt of all of the adverse impacts would be borne by them, that they would probably not like that idea very much. And the environmental justice poster child is represented by communities like ours across the nation, across the world, that are saddled with harmful industrial facilities to serve more affluent communities outside of these less affluent communities. So when everyone thought it was a great idea to put the regional sewage treatment plant in the Marina area, and a great idea to do the same with the regional landfill, and a great idea to close the other 4 sand mining plants in our peninsula area, but leave Marina's sand mining plant to serve the region with sand as the last remaining coastal sand mining plant in the United States. That was great for everybody to shift the burden of those industrial facilities onto Marina. Great, it's a win-win for everybody else outside of Marina. We didn't like the idea that we had lost 75 acres of our land within our city limits due to the erosion caused by the sand mining plant. We wanted that to stop. We spent somewhere around $300,000 or $400,000 toward the closure of the CEMEX sand mining plant and trying to respect as much as possible the workers there so that they have about a 6-year period before the workers will no longer be there. And instead of the workers sand mining, there'll be 3 years of reclamation of the damage done that's still left on the land that has not yet washed into the ocean near the sand mining plant. All toward the goal of restoring, reclaiming the natural habitat of the CEMEX property where for the last 106 years or so there's been a sand mining plant. So that finally Marina took a big step to fight a gigantic mega corporation so that we could have our coastal dunes back, we could help all the other cities whose erosion of their beaches had increased due to the same sand mining plant in Marina. So everyone benefited by Marina, the State Lands Commission, the Coastal Commission, Save Our Shores, surf riders, and a lot of private citizens, Sustainable Seaside, Citizens for Sustainable Marina, everyone bound together to close the CEMEX land plant so it could be protected in perpetuity for its natural values and its protection of our resistance against flooding, etc. Those dunes are very important in a lot of ways, and they're important for all of us from the Salinas River south. So, great, celebrate. We did a great thing with a great team. The footnote is that instead of having a property to restore for the benefit of future generations so they can see what endangered species habitat is and what it's like when people band together to protect endangered species and habitat, the footnote is that we're faced with yet another industrial facility to serve the region but not to serve us with one drop of water. The insult to injury that was mentioned by Keith is that any water that has to be returned will be returned to Castroville, north of the Salinas River. So, you put all that together, this is a classic environmental injustice. And so, what the city will be doing will be stressing this point in every one of these steps coming forward. We also will be stressing that, as Keith mentioned, and I think Gail mentioned as well, that if the battle of science is won because CPUC, being a utility company, commission, looks down the straw and sees the CalAmp science will result in a new public utility, they're going to like that science, because that's what they do. Just like the FAA, when they look down a straw and they see an airplane, they're happy. If they see something else besides an airplane, they don't really want that near an airport. So the CPUC is a public utility company. It's in the business of approving utilities. So we will be constantly telling them that there is no mitigation for harm done to Marina's groundwater. That CalAmp will not make us whole. CalAmp refuses to make us whole because they can't afford to make us whole. They can't probably afford this project the way it's going if it doesn't cause harm. You saw the financial numbers. If it does cause harm, CalAmp cannot afford and will not pay tens of millions of dollars on a regular basis to fix our contaminated groundwater caused by their profit-seeking measure. Instead, they'll do their best to make us whole, perhaps, by trucking in water or some other cheap alternative. But any community that exists today using good quality groundwater would not want to see that change to trucked in water or some other outside water provided to you that doesn't come out of your tap, but somehow it comes to you in some other way. What kind of a future, what kind of reputation, what kind of a quality of life would that be in the City of Marina and the Ord community as compared to what we have now? So if you read the draft EIR or the final EIR that's out now, it does not state in the mitigation what will happen if our groundwater is contaminated by this project. And there's a battle of science, and it's not unusual to have one side saying the science defends their interest, and the other side says the science defends their interest. So we have that going on here today. But it's our water, that's the only water that's going to be at risk from this project. No one else's water. So we will be keeping that in mind. And the last thing I want to mention is the Western Snowy Plover has some disappointing news in that since the slant well went in, the test slant well, the Western Snowy Plovers, which is the city mascot, those nests and those reproductive outputs have been plummeting since the test slant well went in Marina, differently, a higher decrease than the rest of the Monterey area south of us, where those plovers are not doing nearly as bad as the Marina plovers. It's not hard to see that the noise, the vibrations, the construction, the trucks, the maintenance of a well inside their habitat might not be what a sensitive bird would want. It might move away while that's all going on. That's one test slant well. That's going to be turned into a production well. It'll stay where it's at. It'll be maintained. It'll have a road going to it. And there'll be 7 to 10 others, or 6 to 10 others, 6 to 9 others. So we'll be focused on that as well, because the snowy plover has no voice in this process unless we give it a voice. And our citizens in Marina are very busy working multiple jobs. Most of them do not have a voice in this project either, unless they're here tonight or hearing about what's going on tonight, and do what I hope that you all do, write some simple comments so that the public can be heard at the public utility process. And for the rest of the Marina, who does not have a voice because they're too busy working, may not even understand English, or can't understand what we're talking about tonight because they haven't spent more than 2 minutes trying to understand it, we are their voice. You are their voice. So together, let's make our voice as strong as possible, and the City of Marina will be behind you every step of the way, even though this may become $1 million or more price tag. Much more expensive than the CEMEX plant. But it's sacred to us, and I'd like to thank our city manager who stepped in, Lane Long. He has had his life and his job trying to run the city hijacked by the CalAm process, because it's so complicated, so expensive, and so all-time consuming that many things in our city are no longer getting done that the citizens have been wanting to have done for a long time. But I just want to say that he often is here past midnight in his office working alone, with stacks of paper surrounding him, and CalAm is a big reason why. Before that it was CEMEX, and there are other things that are not getting done while we try to stop the profit motive from taking over our public resource and our future water supply. Thank you.
Thank you, that was very inspirational. And next we have George coming back up here to talk about updates on Public Water Now and how there are many mutually supportive objectives for all of us. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. Wow.
Yes.
Great. I'm glad that CalAm is represented here, because this is the only public forum to review the EIR project on the entire peninsula. But you're in the position of bearing a huge burden if this project succeeds. The beneficiary of the project, the peninsula, not having any public hearing. Water Management District is a regular meeting, no public review of this. The mayors meet tomorrow night, no public discussion of this. This is the only place this is happening. And I do think that Cal-Am, you ought to get a message. You know, your project's not going very far. What we have in common, and I just appreciate so much Kathy and the Just Water group that emerged very recently. And boy, they've been on a fast track learning everything they can, and they're nonstop. And you should really appreciate the work that they're doing. Here's what we have in common. Local control is better than corporate control. Very simple. We're on track to do that. We have regional interests. Cal-Am has a very narrow interest. And the mayor's group from the peninsula has a very narrow interest. But those of us who are in this business are looking at the regional context of what we're doing. Our ratepayers are already paying the highest bill in the entire country. And they're facing this kind of narrow-minded project with a huge negative impact on the marina area, as well as the larger community. And we're just tired of dealing with the cash cow. That's what we see Cal-Am as, a cash cow, a dominant monopoly, playing us like fiddles, because they have the PUC in their, largely in their pocket. Now they'll deny that, and maybe the PUC has Cal-Am in their pocket. We don't know which way it goes. But let me tell you what the PUC mission is. The very first statement of their mission is they will do 3 things, all in the first paragraph, not 1, 2, 3, first paragraph only. We will regulate corporate utilities, this is all utilities, so that they have a profit built into their budget. The investment, the potential investment of outside stockholders and investment interests, it will be attractive to investment. Second point. Third point is the finances will be positive.
Wow.
Well, now, how much of a better guarantee can any private, corporate, profit-making enterprise have? If the people who supervise you guarantee you profit, investment opportunity, and your bottom line is going to look good. Nobody else has a guarantee. That's why this monopoly system is terrible for us. I think that the conflicting hydrologist is going to be a major factor in what's going forward. We don't need to go forward. There can be compromises made. Cal-Am is on a no compromise track. They're stuck in the ground, in concrete, on their project, period. As the public agencies around here, Marina Coast, the Pure Water Monterey project, and the Water Management District itself, we now have, for the first time, in my opinion, but we have the 3 agencies are working together, and they have probably, each individually, have highly talented, bright, accomplished, progressive, interested, accomplished general managers. You got Keith Vandermaten, you got Paul Shudo, you got David Stoll. Never have we had those 3 agencies with the powerhouse of talent and ability that exists, and they want to work together, and they are working together. Who's on the sidelines with the dynamics going forward on compromise, on partnership, on regional issues, on sustainability priorities, as well as responsible use of the resource? There are 3 agencies that are doing it, all of them public. The one that's sitting on the sideline and is not engaged in those discussions, they're told what's happening, and maybe they're in the discussions, but they're not part of the decision process. You got 3 public agencies, and you got Cal-Am. Cal-Am is stuck in their project. That's all I want to say, what we have in common. Sustainability, high priority for that. Regional issues, we could do it at less cost. All of the options coming forward are less costly than Cal-Am's. Cal-Am doesn't want to look at those. We can resolve it with time. We can resolve it with leadership. We have the talent locally. The options are on the table. Time frame works for us. We can get out of the CDO problem by just a little cooperation going forward. We need the PUC to help us cooperate. We need them to do that. If you send your letters and so on, please say the solution is here, help make the local projects work. That's what you'd ask for. But you got to get their attention. Please do. How the things go in general.
I just basically want to find out, because we have done this with the PUC for so many years. It's not like we just did this for the last couple. And every time we object to whatever is going on and write letters and go to meetings and go to before the PUC, everything has been overturned. It's always been approved for Cal-Am. What is going to make the difference this time? If the PUC...
Timing and today. It's
Okay.
different today,
Okay.
but still speak. You have an opportunity.
Volume, the number of us.
Okay, we'll have a little time left for Q&A, but I want to tell you what we have at the tables, speaking of our voices. There, and on 4 stations here and over there, please sign letters. We have 3 letters. One is geared a little bit more to Marina. The other one is more regional perspective, so anyone in the room should sign it. And then we have a fill-in card that you can use those letters to develop your own points, and you can just write it in. And we will, Just Water will take the responsibility. You just sign your name and write whatever you wish, and we will take the responsibility to scan each one of them and individually mail it, email it to the correct address for the CPCU and also the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, the other lead to the FEIR. So we will do that. We also have another session next week, 2 days before the end of the deadline, April 19th. So there are extra flyers there, so please get them out to your family and friends. And let's see, what else do I want to say? We will be posting after tonight all 3 of the letters on our website, and it's C, letter C for citizens, the number 4, justwater.org. And so, yes, there it goes. So please get your friends and families and neighbors to go on our site and click on the What You Can Do tab, and we will post those because you can also just email that yourself, but we'd like to have your commitment tonight to sign your name, and we'll get those out. I think that's about it. Did I miss anything? Okay. All right, so let's entertain a few questions before we adjourn to do letter signing. Anyone else have any? Yes?
Excuse my naivete, but from listening to all the expert speakers here tonight, it just seems to me that if this organization that is does not really have water rights in the CEMEX family wants to just basically take the water and not return any of it to us and not provide any protection, to me it seems like, doesn't it violate our constitutional rights? It just seems like some kind of really basic violation that really seems like a very completely legitimate basis for a lawsuit.
Yes, we all feel that way.
Is that not the case?
That is the case.
That's exactly.
That is the case.
I used to be shocked about the CEMEX and wondering how could that be happening in this day and age. Well, that was a simple one, and I'm now, as you are saying, I can't believe this. This is even worse than that. So yes. Does anyone want to say anything about that other than to confirm you are right? Your gut is telling you the exact right thing.
Kathy, I just a comment on Tom Moore, President, Marina Coast Water District Board of Directors. I think we would all collectively, perhaps even Cal-Am, want to avoid litigation, at least I should hope so, because if we go into this litigation, there will probably be something like 40 to 60 attorneys working for a dozen or 2 dozen other clients. The litigation will last 4 to 10 years, probably. It will cost a horrendous amount of money. Marina Coast is already into litigation with Cal-Am and the county who sued us in the past to the tune of multiple millions of dollars, unfortunately coming out of our ratepayers' pockets. And Cal-Am just recently sent us a demand for $1.8 million, which translates into about 25 to 30 bucks out of the pocket of every single person who receives service from Marina Coast Water District in Marina and the Ord community. So we really don't want to go there, and we're trying hard to be regional and not go there.
But the advantage is though that it would stall the project. if it stalled it for 10 years, at least that would be one.
The problem is that we don't have any water. And Cal-Am, or.
Well, what I can tell you is, your exact point is we have very basic rights that are guaranteed to us. And what the City of Marina is doing with our legal team, with the briefs that we'll be filing and everything that we're doing, is we're going to be doing everything within our power to guarantee that our rights are protected. And if that means that we have to go to court, then we will go to court. But we are doing everything within our power to guarantee exactly what you said.
And I think the point that someone made over here is that we don't have water, and I'm assuming you're from the peninsula, and I thought you were from the peninsula, because we don't want to have that fear-mongering that the peninsula won't have water. Keith has told us that there are absolutely options available that include even MCWD helping out in that situation. So we need to balance that perspective and not, buy into, oh my gosh, we have to get off the Carmel River and there is no other options. There are. Yes?
Well, I was just wondering, the whole thing is this CPCN.
Yes.
Is a certificate of public convenience and necessity.
Yes. It's a
Now, if it's not necessary to do this whole thing,
yes.
okay, what is going on now in terms of settlement? Because I think that would be far better, from Cal-Am's perspective, because the litigation is such a waste.
Yes.
I think the attorneys, somebody's getting bad advice if they're going forward to litigate this, because it's a tremendous waste. And I was just wondering what's going on in terms of settlement, because this could be settled.
Do either of you two want to address that? There's two tracks, okay? There's this environmental impact report that we're talking about now, and then there are these other legal proceedings called evidentiary hearings, and then they're two parallel tracks, and both of them are very complex. But would you like to say anything about that?
I think that everybody is still, there are multiple parties in this action. Cal-Am is the project proponent, City of Marina is a party in the action, MCWD is a party in the action, your organization is a party, what's the name?
Public Trust Alliance.
Public Trust, George's organization is a party, Just Water is a party. All of us are trying to very much avoid the cost of litigation. And all of us have had discussions. We formally set up some settlement discussion process that we tried to pursue, and Cal-Am was at those also, to try to come up with a settlement that's regional, that addresses the issues. Everybody in this litigation, everybody that's parties to the action has one objective, and we all agree on one objective. The peninsula needs water. The second objective we're asking everybody to buy into is the peninsula needs water, but not at the harm of someone else. And we're trying to come up with settlements that meet both those dual objectives. If the CPUC, which is on a completely different track, they're not part of any of this settlement, they don't give a darn about settlement. What they do is they follow the process that they have an applicant with a project standing in front of it, asking for approval. That's why this PR campaign, that's why the solicitation from you to say, please slow down, please look at the local interest. You represent, you are supposed to protect our local interest, is so vital and so important. That is slowing the CPUC down to do what Mr. Vandermountain has just said. Let's go to the California State Water Resources Control Board and look at questions that are bigger, like water rights. If the CPUC says this project goes forward, all the 21 parties are aggrieved. All the other 20 of us have some grievance. And it starts a timeline that we have no ability to do anything but to appeal, to go to court, to follow legal procedures. And if that project goes forward, the CPUC, as you've been told tonight, doesn't have any jurisdiction to decide water rights. So they're just skimming over that. We don't need to look at that. We're just approving a project. So the venue for my city, as the city manager is trying to say to you, the venue that I have as a city, the venue that each of you as public, members of our public, regardless of where you live, the venue for that is in a court, which requires attorneys. But what we're all concerned about too is that we filed that lawsuit, but in the meantime, Cal-Am's going down the path of getting permits, doing the projects, moving along, and at some point, we've all seen these cases where there's so much money invested in a project that nobody, no court, no commission wants to stop it. So what we're trying to talk about tonight is that this comment period in the final EIR is a place for all of us to insert our voice, that you've heard so many messages, and I'm so happy to hear all of you reciting those messages back to us as presenters. You get it. But you need to put it in writing. You need to put it into that phone call. You need to have the CPUC hear you to enable settlement, if the other 20 of us can come up with something, to have time to have that happen. We all have a role, and we're asking you to act on your role and join us and help us to get to those time to make those settlements.
Thank you, and I think that's, well, we have more. You can say they're wrong, but if you want us to, Melody, we'll go for another 5 minutes.
I'm really curious about the State Water Resources Control Board issue. Like, can't you get to them soon enough for them to go to the CPUC and say, don't do this?
They have represented, we apparently there's communications with them by multiple parties, and they're indicating their schedule is so heavily impacted. So, but you have Cal-Am on the super train saying we need to move forward, this has been lingering. But the other thing is, going back to Kathy's point is, and Keith's point is, there is water to give people. There will be adequate water. PG, Pacific Grove, Carmel, Monterey, there's water to give them that if this takes us 10 years to figure it out, they will turn on their spigot and water will come out for the next 10 years. We've addressed that. We all know that's there. We all can work collectively to provide that water. And the other thing is, in the next 10 years, what's the change in the science? What's the change in the technology? When you actually have a need for this project, there might be completely new methods of getting the water.
So what you're saying is the state board is too busy to do their job right now? This is kind of crazy.
No, the chair of the state board, I've been up there in Sacramento and Felicia, and she says, what are they doing down in Monterey?
Why don't they find out?
Well, the thing is
Yeah,
that there is a tremendous political pressure on these boards, and nobody wants to do it. And essentially, this has been going on not just 2 years, but for 50 years.
Was there,
Yeah.
Michael?
So, first of all, I just want to commend every speaker. You were all very inspiring. I'm grateful for the video. It's 90 minutes. Can the State Water Board watch that? Can the PUC watch that?
Cal-Am is watching it.
No, I mean, like, to inform the decision makers, this information today was awesome.
Yeah.
And so, that video, guys, is gold.
West,
And then just going back to litigation, I don't know if anybody in the room knows the answer to this question. Does Cal-Am bear any risk? If they go to litigation and spend tens of millions of dollars trying to win, doesn't that pass through to the ratepayers? Do the shareholders bear any risk? So there's no reason for them to fear litigation like everybody else in the room.
Right.
Right?
Susan?
A quick question. Because the State Water Board can make the decisions that may help in this situation, should the public be contacting the State Water Board?
That's very much the campaigning that we're asking you to do.
So we should not just call the CPUC and write to them, we should be writing to the State Water Board as well.
First things first.
Yeah, I got an April
Yes.
19th.
Right.
PUC.
But we should
Yeah.
also be
But
contacting.
you can send them out on the exact same day.
Right, I just want to be
You
sure,
can be a
because if
hero.
those people are the
Yes.
ones that need to move on this and aren't, then we should put some pressure on them to
Susan?
do so.
On our
Right.
C4 Just Water side, we had a letter campaign that sort of culminated about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And we did have letters
Great.
to the State Water Board and to the Coastal Commission, who has also played a significant role in advancing this project. So the letters are on there, to
Great.
Bill Monning, to Mark Stone. So you can go to our website and you can individually, but yes, we will be having other campaigns as the
Good.
future unfolds. So again, Michael, thank you for thanking everybody again, but I think we need to close and we need to get everybody, at the tables. And I'm sorry, there's just,
It's real quick.
okay, Tom, one last thing.
We note that CalAm is here to listen to the community and how we might be countering their project. I'm just wondering if they might allow me to attend their next Board of Directors meeting to figure out how they're going to respond to this objection.
You can talk to them afterwards. Okay, thank you all very much for coming. Appreciate it so much. And please go to the